Kick it.
Ahoy, mateys, and welcome aboard to This Week in Nickelodeon History. It's a pleasure to have you here as we celebrate some Nickelodeon anniversaries that have taken place in between the times of January 15th to January 21st. My name is Captain Eric, and I just want to say thank you to all of you who sent me your kind messages over through our various email channels for both shows over the first video episode, last week's This Week in Nickelodeon History, episode 42. It certainly was enough juice to let me turn on the webcam for a second week of celebrating Nickelodeon anniversaries. And boy, do we have a big slate to get through this week, so let's waste no more time and dive in. 25 years ago, all the way back on January 15th, 1998, we had the final episode of The Secret World of Alex Mack. The show, created by Thomas W. Lynch and Ken Lippman, ran for 4 seasons of 78 episodes. This is actually a new piece of Alex Mack history that I learned myself in some of the research today. But apparently, Season 4 was not meant to be the end of the show. There was a Season 5 planned and offered. Not only that, a Season 5 and a planned feature film was offered to Alex Mack star Larissa Oleynik, who decided that at that point in time she was burnt out on the role and turned the offer down. She would go on to, of course, have an extraordinary acting career and continuing through that, but it's just incredible to think that at one point in time we almost had a 5th season of The Secret World of Alex Mack along with a feature film. I feel like the show is certainly ripe for a feature film exploration. If you have no idea about what The Secret World of Alex Mack is about, it's essentially the same idea of what happens with Daredevil, but Alex Mack doesn't go blind. She simply gains the abilities of telekinesis, shooting electricity out of her fingertips, while also being able to turn in some sort of gel-like puddle and move around the room at her will. Although some of these powers as the show go on prove to be a little bit unstable, it is still a wild ride of a show, and if you were growing up in the 90s, this may have been your very first science fiction kind of show. And if you were a fan of Alex Mack, do you have a favorite episode, a favorite character? I personally only watched maybe a couple episodes here and there. I enjoyed the concept of the show, but I was so young when this was on Nickelodeon that it simply wasn't gravitating my attention as other properties were. But every time I see anything associated with Alex Mack, I do get a bit nostalgic, and it's one of those shows that I hope to dive down one of these days. It's only 78 episodes. That doesn't seem too terrible. 21 years ago, on January 12th, 2002, The Nick Cannon Show premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Nick Cannon, the show ran for 2 seasons of 27 episodes. It was also executive produced by Mike Tollin, Joe Davola, and Nickelodeon CEO Brian Robbins. This was technically a spin-off of All That. I remember Nick Cannon, for a very brief time, was a cast member on All That, and I think he just made such an impression that they couldn't hold him on one show and he had to have his own show. The concept of the show takes Nick Cannon in a comedic reality show kind of way, where he is taking over some sort of concept like the beach or Hollywood, or it could be something like fitness in general. He is just taking over fitness or taking over space. It sounds ridiculous, and it is, but if you were a fan of Nick Cannon, this is certainly a fun time. I have no idea if Nick Cannon is under the impression that he is currently on the record of trying to take over the world record for the amount of children to have, but somebody should tell him that there isn't a 3rd season of the Nick Cannon Show going on. Although he has continued the Nick Cannon Show in a different sort of way, that moniker in a different aspect. But in the sense of taking over, buddy, you don't need to have that record. It's okay. Let whoever has that have that to themselves. 17 years ago, on January 16th, 2006, the Timmy Power Hour 2 premiered on Nickelodeon. What a time for me to have turned the reintroduction of Timmy and Jimmy in the same world with one another. If you were a fan of either of these properties, The Fairly Odd Parents or The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, the idea of these two shows coming together certainly was an exciting one. There weren't many cartoon crossovers that I can think of growing up. There was the Flintstones meets the Jetsons, but beyond that, there was some mild crossovers that would happen, characters appearing in one episode, or as a gag, like when the Real Monsters showed up in an episode of Rugrats. Oh, there you are, there's a little bit of a crossover, but Nickelodeon really never had a solid crossover up to this point in time in the animation realm. And for two properties that looked so dynamically different, that's where my excitement at least came from. I'm such a fan of animation that I reveled to see how certain animators would take on a pre-existing character. And for both of these shows to make this special and the concurrent ones that came around it work in a way that it could be canon is incredible. They were able to somehow work in the rules of magic in a world of science, and they're just a fun time. I can't recommend any one of the three enough, but if I can just say, the 20th anniversary of the Timmy Power Hour is going to happen in 2024. And if Paramount Plus is looking for another big animated property that is going to bring subscribers over to the network, then may I offer my services in just saying that a Timmy Power Hour 4 would be a great course of action. I don't think you have a more hype crossover that has happened than when these two properties met. It's happened plenty of times, but if I find myself in a social situation, in a bar, a restaurant, and I'm wearing some sort of Nickelodeon clothing, one of the top three things that someone my age may bring up as something that I would want to remember is, hey, do you remember that time that Jimmy Neutron met Timmy Turner? It's just something that is inherently ingrained in everybody who watched it at the time. Don't tell me that you are not remembering this. This isn't something that, oh yeah, that did happen. No, the second you mention Jimmy Neutron or Timmy Turner, it's one of those first things that comes to mind. Oh my goodness, they had those incredible crossover movies, and there is still room to have a fourth one and for these characters to meet. And for today's top 5, I'm actually going to give you my top 5 Fairly Odd Parents characters that I'd like to see hop over in the three-dimensional Jimmy Neutron style. Technically, more Jimmy Neutron characters have been animated in the Fairly Odd Parents style, given the ending of Timmy Power Hour 3 in that 2.5D space where they were all really technically animated as 2D characters. But this is going to be 5 characters that I would love to see in that 3D element. The Fairly Odd Parents was, of course, created by Butch Hartman, and The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius was created by John A. Davis. 14 years ago, on January 16th, 2009, Hotel for Dogs premiered in theaters. The Nickelodeon movie was directed by Thor Freudenthal and was made on a $35 million budget, making in $117 million at the box office. 12 years ago, on January 17th, 2011, Super Ninjas premiered on Nickelodeon. The show, created by Leo Chu and Eric S. Garcia, ran for 2 seasons of 39 episodes. 8 years ago, on January 17th, 2015, Bella and the Bulldogs premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Jonathan Butler and Gabriel Garza, the show ran for 2 seasons of 39 episodes. 7 years ago, on January 18th, 2016, the Nickelodeon TV movie Rufus premiered, another vehicle for long-standing Nickelodeon actor Jace Norman. The movie took the idea of a boy adopting some sort of dog abilities. That's at least what I've gotten from any of the posters and trailers I've seen of this. It was popular enough to gain a sequel a year later. Rufus 2 premiered 6 years ago on January 16th, 2017. Also premiering on January 16th, 2017, 6 years ago, was Butch Hartman's final Nicktoon. At least for now, Bunsen is a Beast. The show ran for 1 season of 26 episodes. Out of all of the Nicktoons that Butch Hartman has brought the world, Bunsen is a Beast is the one that I've watched the least amount of, and it has nothing to do with the writing, the voice acting choices, or some of the designs of the characters. It has everything to do with the animation style they went with. It also carried over to the final few seasons of The Fairly Odd Parents, where this once beloved animation style, in my opinion, felt extremely cheap. And even though it may look a little crisper in a moment's notice, if you sit down and watch it, it just feels cheap. That's all I can say. It's the one word that comes to mind. And it's not that I can't watch something that feels cheap, but for something to downgrade over time isn't something that should be expected. Shouldn't the opposite happen, where over time the animation gets better and smoother and looks better? It shouldn't degrade to noticeably looking like a different show. And because of that, there was something about Bunsen is a Beast that I couldn't get into. I do plan on watching Bunsen is a Beast at some point in time. It's not going to be today, but let's celebrate its milestone, its 6-year anniversary. Welcome to the world. Bunsen is a Beast. 5 years ago, on January 15th, 2018, The Adventures of Kid Danger premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Mr. Bailey from Good Burger, the show ran for a measly one season of 12 episodes. I just got through talking about my lack of love over the animation style of Bunsen is a Beast, and that is going to continue here in The Adventures of Kid Danger. An idea that makes sense, to take the live-action show Henry Danger and spin it off into an animated property. That makes a ton of sense to me. What doesn't make sense is to have that happen at the same time that Henry Danger is still actively on television. Why would you do that? It feels like if they would have just waited out on an animated version of Captain Man and Kid Danger, they could have let Henry Danger run its course, and then you can have an animated Kid Danger show at the same time that Danger Force is a live-action property. I don't think that would overstimulate the audience. Maybe it would still be too much, but at least the character of Henry wouldn't be so overused in a live-action sense and then in an animated sense. And I honestly think they missed the ball on trying to make this look as much of a comic book as they could have. They could have animated the world of Henry Danger in a multitude of different ways, and I honestly don't think this was the best way to go about it. 4 years ago, on January 21st, 2019, Bixler High Private Eye premiered on Nickelodeon. Another Nickelodeon TV movie that was a vehicle for its starring man, Jace Norman. This guy was everywhere. There is no denying that he wasn't busting his butt for Nickelodeon during this period. Rufus, Rufus 2, The Adventures of Kid Danger, Henry Danger. There's no stopping this guy, and even currently he is still working on projects for Nickelodeon. 3 years ago, on January 17th, 2020, we had the final episode of America's Most Musical Family. The show, which was presented by Nick Lachey with judges Sierra, David Dobrik, and Debbie Gibson, which I will never take the chance to not bring this up. Why is David Dobrik, of all people that could have been picked as possible judges, here judging people on their vocal talent? Do you guys know? No, nobody knows. All right. So the show ran for one season of 13 episodes. The family to take home the top prize and the crown to be named America's Most Musical Family was the Malasway brothers, who have extraordinary voices. If you have never heard any of their performances, it's well worth your time. 3 years ago, on January 18th, 2020, It's Pony premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Ant Blades, the show is still ongoing and is running at 2 seasons of 46 episodes. But It's Pony has gone from the dreaded spot of moving from the main Nickelodeon channel over to the Nicktoons network. But that used to be a death spot. It's not anymore. It's 2023. We all know where It's Pony is being aired. So if you're an It's Pony fan, find yourself Nicktoons Network. Find the way to watch that show and show your support. You never know. If it gains enough support and popularity and gets enough views on the Nicktoons Network, it may become financially viable to make more seasons of that show. So if you're a fan of that Nicktoon, I advise you, find it, give it a watch, and let Nickelodeon know on social media that you're a fan. It's the best thing that you can do. 2 years ago, on January 15th, 2021, The Astronauts finished its run on Nickelodeon. Created by Daniel Knopf, the show ran for one season of 9 episodes. And 1 year ago, on January 16th, 2022, the Nickelodeon comedy series Warped premiered on Nickelodeon. Created by Kevin Koplo and Heath Seifert, the show ran for one season of 13 episodes. Oh, it may be This Week in Nickelodeon History's end for this week, but for my top 5 of the week, I'd like to give you my top 5 Fairly OddParents characters that I'd like to see cross over into the Jimmy Neutron universe for the very first time in a potential Timmy Power Hour 4. Number 5 is my least favorite villain in the Fairly OddParents, but I think his design would look extraordinary in the Jimmy Neutron universe.
Weak people of this world, bow to me, your new leader, Dark Laser. Surrender or face Flipsy, the flipping dog of doom. Man, I'd never get tired of that.
He may be a fan favorite, but that laugh is overused in my opinion. But beyond that, I do love the concept of the character, where he came from. I do like that there is another reoccurring villain added to the roster, and I think the madness that may happen between taking over Retroville or the Earth in that world and then having to run into the Yokians is an exciting possibility. But number 4 is an even more exciting possibility. Remy Bucksaplenty and Wandissimo. Now, I don't know where these characters currently stand with one another in the Fairly OddParents canon, but the idea of another computer program coming into Retroville and running amok on their own is exciting. Timmy has, I think, in some way properly used his magic in Retroville and in that universe and hasn't gone out of his way to... I mean, it's almost been destroyed. That is what happened, but the world at large hasn't really been exposed to magic or just things popping out of nowhere. And I think Remy just coming in and causing enough mischief that the world starts noticing, wait, what is going on? That would be kind of exciting. I know that that doesn't necessarily happen in the Fairly OddParents universe, but that's a universe that is intertwined with magic. In the Jimmy Neutron universe, they don't have fairies. That whole concept doesn't exist, so all of a sudden, this magic happening around them, I don't know, that's really exciting. Number 3 would certainly be the most challenging character to adapt into the Jimmy Neutron style. It's Mr. Crocker. And although he has his place in history as the main villain of the very first Timmy Power Hour, he never really had his time to shine in Retroville. So how would that guy look in that world? We could even see over-exaggerated characters' reactions to seeing this grotesque-looking human, and the joke could be for Mr. Crocker, well, just another day here in a different universe. Same reactions, different universe. Poor Mr. Crocker, can't catch a leg up, but his whole manic style would be interesting to see adapt in Jimmy Neutron. Number 2 is, to me, my favorite villain of the Fairly OddParents, and one that deservedly should be the main villain if these two characters and their universes are ever to collide again, and that is Vicky. Vicky, Icky with a V, is the main source of the Fairly OddParents even really coming into Timmy Turner's care in the first place. Timmy may have had a life that even before Vicky's arrival would have necessitated some fairies, given that his parents clearly were not giving him any attention, but the second Vicky shows up and enters his life is when Timmy is then worthy enough to have fairies. How does this character interact in the world of Jimmy Neutron? What is her plan in this new bulky 3D universe? Only time can tell. But my number 1 answer is actually a character I would like to see with a certain design style adapted to it. I'm talking about the Crimson Chin, the superhero of the Fairly OddParents universe, and one that not only Timmy Turner has interacted with, but one that Jimmy Neutron has interacted with as well. These characters worked together in tandem in Timmy Power Hour 3 within the confines of a Crimson Chin comic book to give them the rush of stopping a villain, since that's what they were looking for. I think it would be cool if we could get the Crimson Chin out of a comic book and into Retroville, similar in a way to how anime characters have been adapted in the game Fortnite, where from every angle the cell shading matches how it should look for the design of the character. Imagine adapting that style on top of a 3D model of the Crimson Chin so that it looks like a comic book character come to life. That's quite exciting, and if the Crimson Chin is going to be 3D, then I imagine we also get a little bit of Cleft the Boy Chin Wonder as well, so this is a little bit of a twofer. I really hope that Nickelodeon comes together at some point and puts the worlds of Dimsdale and Retroville together again for one massive, even if it's a final time, Timmy Power Hour. That is going to be it for this week in Nickelodeon history. Thank you for joining me. If you would like to write into the show, you can do so. Write me an email at nickelodeonhistory@gmail.com. Any comments, questions, or suggestions can be read out on the air. If you would like to follow me on social media, you can do so at I'm Ready Podcast on Twitter or at SpongeBob Podcast on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the Captain Eric YouTube channel. If you're watching this already, hit the subscribe button below. You can decide if you want to hit that bell, but no big deal if you don't. You can also watch this episode on Spotify. So if you're also listening to this podcast on that platform already, you can turn on the video version and see Captain Eric in beautiful, bulky 3D. Subscribing to the YouTube channel is the best means to show your support for Captain Eric, but if you would like to go the extra mile and support Captain Eric in a completely different way, you can click on the Redbubble link in the podcast description below, where you can purchase new and updated Captain Eric logos on a multitude of different products. Anything that comes in from my projects go directly back into my projects, and it's always appreciated. As always, guys, please stay safe out there, be kind to one another, and come aboard again to another week in Nickelodeon history. Ooh, we're near the end of the show.
I'm here with my friends, Nickelodeon, the